Captain Ethan Carter stood at the helm of the human space station Vanguard, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of the galaxy outside the observation window. The station hummed with the energy of diplomacy, tensions running high as they prepared to host a vast delegation, an alien species that had been a source of both fascination and fear for humanity. The Vash were known for their superior technology and fierce warrior culture, making their sudden appearance at the peace talks a significant event. The Vanguard had been built for moments like this, a hub of interstellar cooperation where humans and alien species could meet and discuss the future of their relationship. Ethan had been chosen to oversee the mission due to his experience with delicate negotiations. His job was simple: maintain peace, keep the discussions civil, and ensure everything went smoothly. However, as the hour approached for the Vash delegation's arrival, something felt different. Ethan couldn't shake the unease that settled in his gut. The briefing had mentioned a Maid, an alien woman who would accompany the Vash leaders as part of their entourage. But he hadn't expected her to be the subject of so much attention. There had been no information about her beyond the basic details. Her presence had been described as insignificant, yet for some reason, it felt like she was the one everyone was whispering about. The door to the observation deck opened, and a Vash representative entered, followed by the Maid. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She was striking, with sharp features and a presence that seemed to fill the room. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, dark and intense, held a quiet confidence that no one would dare challenge. She wore a simple, elegant dress, a deep violet that contrasted against the pale skin of her alien form. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught Ethan's attention. It was the way she moved, graceful, deliberate, as though each step had been calculated. The Vash representative introduced her as Lyra, a servant of the delegation, a maid. But Ethan wasn't fooled by her title. There was something in the way she carried herself, something beneath the surface that hinted at hidden strength. She met his gaze, her smile subtle, yet it conveyed a quiet authority that no one else in the room seemed to notice. "Captain Carter." Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. It was soft, melodic, with an undertone of something more, something dangerous. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Ethan forced a smile, though something about her words sent a shiver down his spine. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Lyra," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The room fell into a tense silence as the Vash representatives moved to their seats and the diplomatic discussions began. Lyra, as promised, stood quietly by the side, her gaze never straying far from the group. But Ethan found himself distracted by her presence. Her calm demeanor seemed out of place in the midst of the tense negotiations. As words were exchanged and the future of their interspecies alliance was debated, Ethan couldn't help but watch her. Every time someone moved too quickly or raised their voice in anger, she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood taller, her posture unwavering. Ethan's attention was drawn back to the discussions as the Vash representative addressed a critical issue regarding human expansion into Vash-controlled territories. The debate grew heated, voices rising in volume as both sides struggled to find common ground. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, the pressure of the negotiations weighing on him. It was then that he noticed Lyra's hand resting by her side seemed to tighten into a fist. He couldn't help but wonder what it was about her that made him feel like something was about to shift. The room erupted in shouts, accusations being thrown across the table when suddenly a loud noise came from the corner of the room. A chair was overturned, and a scuffle broke out between two of the Vash delegates. Before anyone could react, Lyra stepped forward with remarkable speed. Her movement was so quick, so fluid, that Ethan barely had time to process what happened. One of the delegates was disarmed, his weapon falling to the floor with a clatter. Lyra stood between them, her eyes cold and focused, her body language exuding authority. She turned her head slightly, her gaze locking with Ethan's. The briefest of smiles tugged at the corner of her lips, almost as if to say, "I've got this." Ethan blinked, his heart racing. It wasn't just the way she had handled the situation, it was the way she had done it so effortlessly, so naturally. He couldn't help but wonder if she had been trained for combat. The thought was unsettling. How could someone who appeared so delicate, so graceful, possess such skill? The scuffle was quickly diffused by the other Vash delegates, who seemed to calm down once they realized that Lyra had taken control of the situation. The Vash were warriors, after all, and Lyra's intervention had only reminded them of that. The rest of the meeting proceeded without incident, though Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. He knew there was more to her than met the eye. As the meeting came to a close and the Vash delegates filed out of the room, Lyra lingered for a moment. She didn't speak, but her eyes held Ethan's gaze for a few seconds longer than necessary. It was a subtle exchange, but one that left Ethan with a sense of unease. She wasn't just a maid. She was something else entirely. Ethan had a feeling that the quiet alien woman with the dangerous smile would play a much larger role in this mission than he had initially thought. What that role was, however, he wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. Lyra was no ordinary maid, and Ethan couldn't help but be drawn to the mystery that surrounded her. The next day, Ethan couldn't shake the thoughts of Lyra from his mind. He had barely slept, his mind racing with questions about the mysterious alien maid who had appeared out of nowhere, and with such startling skill. He knew there was more to her than just a servant. She was a puzzle, and he found himself wanting to solve it. As the day wore on, tensions between the human diplomats and the Vash delegation seemed to escalate. The peace talks were beginning to hit a deadlock, with neither side willing to budge on key issues. Ethan's job as mediator was becoming more difficult by the minute. He found himself in endless meetings trying to keep the peace, but his mind kept drifting back to Lyra. It wasn't just her beauty or the quiet strength she displayed. It was something deeper. There was a certain coldness in her gaze, a hint of something dangerous lurking beneath her composed exterior. Ethan had seen it before in other military leaders. The same quiet confidence, the same readiness to act without hesitation. But Lyra wasn't a soldier, or at least that was the impression he had gotten. She was supposed to be a maid. After the morning meetings, Ethan decided to take a break and walk through the station's promenade. The Vanguard was a massive structure, a true testament to humanity's technological advancements. The promenade was filled with diplomats, crew members, and occasional tourists, but it was unusually quiet today. Ethan strolled along the observation windows, gazing out into the endless expanse of space. It was peaceful here, away from the constant discussions of war and peace. He didn't expect to see her. Lyra stood near a window at the far end of the promenade, her silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light. She was alone, an unusual sight for someone usually surrounded by delegates or staff. Her posture was relaxed, yet somehow still alert. She wasn't simply looking out into space. She seemed to be observing something, perhaps the stars, or something beyond them. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he should approach her. She was always so composed, so distant. But something about her presence today made him want to know more. Gathering his courage, he walked towards her, his footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. When she turned and saw him, her expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition. "Captain Carter," she said softly, her voice smooth and calm, just as it had been the day before. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I could say the same," Ethan replied, trying to mask his curiosity. "I thought you were busy with the Vash delegation." She shrugged lightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Not everything requires my attention," she said cryptically. Ethan didn't know what to make of her words. There was something about the way she said it, as though she knew more than she let on. "What are you doing here, then?" Lyra's smile was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She turned back to the window and gazed out into the stars. "Sometimes it's good to take a moment and remember that there's more to life than negotiations," she said. Ethan stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. His mind raced with thoughts of her hidden dagger and the way she had handled the situation during the banquet. The same woman who served tea and offered quiet smiles was capable of disarming an entire room in seconds. It didn't add up. "I've been meaning to ask you." Ethan began, his voice low. "What's your role in all of this?" She tilted her head slightly, as though considering his question carefully. "My role?" she repeated. "I am, as you've been told, a maid. I serve the Vash delegates. That's not what I meant." Ethan pressed, his curiosity getting the better of him. "I mean, what's your real role? You're not just a maid." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time Ethan saw a flicker of something sharp, something dangerous. But just as quickly it disappeared, replaced by her usual calm demeanor. "I serve my people, Captain Carter," she replied, her voice steady, "and I do what is asked of me. Nothing more, nothing less." Ethan wasn't satisfied with her answer, but he could tell she wasn't going to reveal anything else. She was playing her cards close to her chest, as though the truth was something she would only share when it suited her. Before he could press further, there was a sudden disturbance at the far end of the promenade. A group of human diplomats entered, speaking in hushed tones. Lyra turned her attention to them for a moment before looking back at Ethan. "You should probably return to your duties, Captain," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm sure your colleagues are waiting for you." Ethan didn't want to leave. Not yet. But he knew she was right. The peace talks couldn't afford to wait. He took one last look at her, studying the way she stood, perfectly still, yet exuding an almost predatory calm. There was something more to her, something he couldn't quite grasp. "You're not just a maid, are you?" Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's smile was faint but genuine. She turned back to the window, her back straight and proud. "No, Captain," she replied softly. "I am much more than that." Ethan left without saying another word, his mind swirling with more questions than answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra was hiding something, and the more he tried to understand, the more mysterious she became. The dagger beneath her skirt was just the beginning. Whatever role she played in the Vash delegation, it was one that went far beyond what anyone had told him. As the doors to the promenade slid closed behind him, Ethan knew one thing. For certain, he hadn't seen the last of Lyra, and he was starting to wonder if he even wanted to AV. Ethan couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was off about Lyra. He tried to focus on the peace talks, but his mind kept drifting back to her. The way she moved, the way she spoke. There was a certain mystery about her that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the way she had taken control of that situation during the banquet. It was everything about her. Her calm, calculated nature, the way she never seemed rattled even in the midst of chaos, made Ethan wonder just what kind of person she really was. The next day, Ethan found himself alone in his office, staring at a pile of diplomatic reports that needed his attention. But the papers in front of him weren't holding his focus. His thoughts kept returning to Lyra. He had to know more about her. Something told him that understanding who she was might help him understand the true nature of the Vash delegation, and possibly the peace talks themselves. He stood up from his desk and made his way to the communications room. There, he found a terminal that would allow him to access records about the Vash delegation. It wasn't a request he had ever made before, and certainly not one he felt comfortable with, but he couldn't shake the need to find out more about Lyra. As the screen flickered to life, he began searching through the available records. Most of the files were classified. He couldn't access anything related to the Vash government or military, but after several attempts, he managed to find a few scattered files from the crew aboard Vanguard, mostly concerning the day-to-day activities of the delegation. There were no details about Lyra's background. Her name was listed, but it was the same as it had been when she was introduced to him. Just a maid, a servant to the Vash. Ethan leaned back in his chair, frustrated. She was more than that, he was sure of it. He couldn't let it go. Then a name caught his attention. Sarah. The file was brief, but it contained a single mention of a Vash operative named Sarah, who had been known for her combat abilities. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Could Lyra's real name be Sarah? And if so, was she the same person? He couldn't just let the matter rest. Ethan decided to take a more direct approach. If he couldn't find the answers he was looking for through official records, he would have to go to Lyra herself. But he had to be careful. She was careful too. Any wrong move, and she could easily shut him down. The following evening, after the day's discussions had wrapped up, Ethan made his way to the crew quarters. He knew it was a risk, but he had to know more. Lyra had told him that she was just a maid, but the way she had looked at him the last time they spoke, her gaze sharp, intense, told him that there was much more beneath the surface. He arrived at her quarters and hesitated for a moment. It was late and he didn't want to disturb her, but the desire to know the truth pushed him forward. He knocked lightly on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, this time a little louder, but still no response. Just as he was about to turn away, the door slid open, and there she was. Lyra, standing in the doorway, her eyes calm but curious. "Captain," she said, her voice soft yet steady. "What brings you here?" Ethan hesitated, trying to keep his composure. I wanted to speak with you about yesterday." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Yesterday?" "The incident at the banquet," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "You were calm, efficient. I don't understand. Why are you here? A maid doesn't usually have those kinds of skills." Lyra didn't seem surprised by his question. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter her quarters. "Come in," she said. "I'm sure you have many questions." Ethan stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. The room was small but comfortable, furnished simply yet elegantly, with hints of vast culture woven throughout. There was a small desk in one corner, a few bookshelves lined with alien texts, and a bed in the far corner. Everything was in its place, meticulously organized. He turned to face her. "I don't understand, Lyra," he said. "You're not just a maid, are you? I've seen the way you carry yourself, the way you handle situations. You're different. You're trained for something else." Lyra stood silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right," she said, her voice low. "I'm not just a maid." Ethan's heart raced. "Then what are you? What's your real role in all of this?" Lyra smiled faintly, but there was no humor in her expression. "My role is more complicated than you realize, Captain, but I can't tell you everything. Not yet." Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity growing. "Why not?" "Because trust is earned, not given freely," she replied. "You're not ready to understand. Not yet." Ethan's frustration mounted. He had expected answers, but now he was only left with more questions. "I'm trying to help," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "I need to know what's going on. If I don't understand what's really happening, we could all be in danger." Lyra's eyes softened slightly. "You don't know what you're asking for, Captain," she said. "There are things at play here that go beyond what you've been told. There are consequences to every choice, and sometimes the truth is a dangerous thing to uncover." Ethan was about to press her further, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm not your enemy, Captain," she said firmly, "but I can't help you if you push too hard. The answers will come when they are meant to." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. He wanted to know more, but something in her gaze told him that he wasn't going to get any more out of her tonight. "I'll take your word for it," he said, reluctantly turning to leave. As he stepped into the hallway, he realized one thing for certain. Lyra was hiding something, and it was something big, but for now, he would have to wait. The truth, it seemed, was something that would have to come in its own time. The next few days aboard the Vanguard passed in a blur of meetings and tense negotiations. The peace talks had reached a critical point, with both sides still struggling to agree on key issues. As much as Ethan tried to stay focused on his work, his mind kept drifting back to Lyra. The brief conversation they had shared lingered in his thoughts. She had been so calm, so composed, but there was something about the way she spoke, something in her eyes, that made him believe she knew far more than she was letting on. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the way she had disarmed the Vash delegate during the banquet. It wasn't just a simple intervention. It was as if she had been trained for such moments. Lyra wasn't just some servant, she was something else entirely. But what? And why had she been sent undercover, as a maid? It didn't make sense. Ethan found himself walking the corridors of the station late that evening, trying to clear his mind. The station was quieter at this hour, with most of the crew either off duty or tucked away in their quarters. As he passed the observation window, his gaze turned instinctively toward the stars. The vastness of space always seemed to offer him some kind of peace, even in the midst of the chaos surrounding the peace talks. But his thoughts were quickly interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, and there she was, Lyra. She walked toward him with the same graceful, effortless stride that had caught his attention from the beginning. Her eyes met his with that same calm confidence, and once again, Ethan felt the pull of curiosity. "Captain," she said softly, her voice as smooth as it had been when they first met. "You seem deep in thought." Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. There was so much he wanted to ask, but part of him still wasn't sure if he could trust her. After all, she had warned him that trust had to be earned. And yet, despite the uncertainty, something about her made him feel like she wasn't an enemy. "I've been thinking about what you said," he finally admitted, keeping his tone casual, "about not being ready for the truth. You're right, I don't know what's really going on. But I need to understand." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood there, her gaze fixed on him, as if she were weighing something in her mind. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Sometimes," she said, "the truth is more dangerous than ignorance. And sometimes the more you know, the less you can do about it." Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" She glanced out toward the stars, her expression distant. "There are forces at work here that neither side fully understands. You think the Vash are here for peace. You think the humans want peace too. But there are others who don't want that. There are those who would see this alliance crumble." Ethan's heart began to race. Who? Who would want that? Lyra met his gaze again, her eyes serious, even sad. "It's not about who. It's about what. There are factions on both sides that benefit from war. Peace is not something they can control. But you, Captain, you're standing in the middle of it all, and whether you know it or not, you have a role to play in all of this." Ethan's mind whirled. He had always known that diplomacy was a tricky business, but he had never imagined the stakes were this high. He had never considered that there might be people who actively wanted the talks to fail. "And what role is that?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. Lyra's expression softened, but only slightly. "The truth isn't something you can handle alone, Ethan. It's bigger than both of us. It's bigger than anyone aboard this station." Ethan's head was spinning. "So what am I supposed to do with all of this? How can I help?" Lyra's smile returned, though it was tinged with sadness. "You've already started helping, just by asking the right questions. But it's not enough to simply know. You'll have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice for the truth. And sometimes, that choice will make you question everything you thought you knew." Ethan felt a weight settle on his chest. He didn't know what she meant exactly, but something in her words struck a chord with him. There was a hidden truth here, one that he hadn't been prepared for. The more he learned, the more complicated everything seemed to become. He had come to this station thinking that peace was just a matter of negotiation, a matter of compromise. But now, he was beginning to realize that peace was something much more fragile, and the forces at play were far beyond anything he had imagined. "I don't understand," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I want to help. I want to do what's right. But how can I make a difference when I don't even know who I'm fighting against?" Lyra's smile faded and she stepped closer to him. "That's the question you'll have to answer for yourself. But remember, Captain, not everything is what it seems. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones we should be most wary of." With that, she turned and began walking away, leaving Ethan standing in the quiet corridor, his mind racing with the weight of her words. He had thought he understood the situation. He had thought the goal was simple: peace. But now, he wasn't so sure. Who was he really fighting for, and who was pulling the strings behind the scenes? As Lyra disappeared into the shadows of the station, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Things were about to get much more complicated. And if he wanted to survive the storm that was coming, he would have to learn to trust the right people. But, for now, he had more questions than answers, and the truth seemed further away than ever. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. The peace talks had reached a breaking point. The negotiators from both the human and Vash sides were growing more frustrated by the minute, and Ethan felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. The hope of a peaceful alliance seemed to be slipping further away with each passing hour. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, and now, he wasn't just worried about the future of the station, he was worried about the future of the entire galaxy. Ethan spent hours in his office, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Lyra. She had said that the truth was dangerous, but that didn't stop him from seeking it out. If the peace talks were to survive, he needed to understand who the real players were. But the more he learned, the more complex things became. It wasn't just about the Vash or the humans anymore. There were factions within both species, each with their own agendas. Some wanted peace, but others wanted war. There were those who saw the talks as a chance for power, and others who saw it as a chance for revenge. Ethan realized that the peace talks were nothing more than a facade, a way for those in control to pull the strings from behind the scenes. The more Ethan dug, the more he realized that Lyra wasn't the only one hiding something. There were others too: Vash delegates, human diplomats, and even members of the Vanguard crew. Everyone seemed to be playing their own game, and no one was being entirely honest. That afternoon, Ethan found himself in the corridor once again, his mind overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He needed to clear his head, to make sense of the tangled web he was now a part of. He had barely taken a few steps when he saw her again. Lyra was standing by the observation window, just as she had been the last time. Her gaze was fixed on the stars, her posture relaxed, but Ethan could tell she was lost in thought, just like him. He walked over to her, his footsteps soft against the floor. "Lyra," he called softly. She turned at the sound of his voice, and for a brief moment their eyes met. There was something unspoken between them, something that neither of them was willing to acknowledge. Yet it was there, a connection forged through shared understanding. "Captain," she said, her tone neutral, "I didn't expect you to come looking for me again." "I need to understand," Ethan said, his voice low. "I need to know what's really going on. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "And what makes you think you can handle the truth, Captain?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I have to try. I can't just sit back and watch as everything falls apart." Lyra's eyes softened slightly and she took a step closer to him. "You think you can stop it? You think you can fix all of this?" He nodded, his jaw set. "I don't know if I can, but I have to try. If I don't, then what's the point of all this? What's the point of being here?" For the first time, Lyra's expression shifted. She looked at him with something resembling sympathy, but there was also a hard edge to her gaze. "There's a reason I didn't tell you everything before, Captain. There are forces at play here that even I can't control. If you think you can just step in and change things, you're fooling yourself." Ethan's frustration bubbled up again. "I don't care about your warnings anymore, Lyra. I don't care about who's controlling everything from behind the scenes. What I care about is stopping this before it all falls apart. I don't care if it's dangerous. I don't care if it's hard. I'm not going to stand by and do nothing." Lyra studied him for a long moment, her eyes flicking over his face. Finally, she sighed, almost as if she had expected this to happen. "You're right about one thing, Captain. You're in the middle of something far bigger than you realize, but you're wrong if you think you can fix it by yourself. There are too many moving parts, too many players who have their own agendas." Ethan felt a sinking feeling in his chest. "So, what? You're just going to sit back and let it all happen?" No, Lyra said firmly. But there's something you need to understand before you can do anything. You're being watched, Captain, by people who are far more powerful than you can imagine. And if you keep pushing for the truth, if you keep digging, you're going to find yourself in the middle of a war you can't win. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Who's watching me? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back to the window, her gaze distant. I can't tell you that, not yet. Ethan's mind was racing. He was in over his head, and he knew it. The truth was more dangerous than he had imagined, and now he wasn't sure what he could trust anymore. Everything he thought he knew about the peace talks, about Lyra, was starting to unravel. But one thing was clear. He couldn't stop now. The stakes were too high and the truth was too important. If he didn't uncover what was really going on, then who would? The galaxy's future wasn't something he could just walk away from. I don't care how dangerous it is, Ethan, said, his voice steady. I'm going to find out the truth no matter what it takes. Lyra turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You've made your choice, Captain. But remember, sometimes the truth is the most dangerous weapon of all. And once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. As Lyra walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts, Ethan realized that she was right about one thing. Once he stepped into this, there was no turning back. But he was already too far in. The only thing left was to see it through to the end. The tension aboard the Vanguard had reached its peak. The peace talks were now in a delicate state of suspension, with both sides wary of each other, each diplomat with their own agenda. Ethan's role had become increasingly difficult as he tried to manage not just the peace process, but the growing uncertainty that seemed to grip the station. The alliances, both human and Vash, were fraying at the edges, and every day seemed to bring new surprises. But it wasn't just the political drama that weighed on Ethan's mind. It was Lyra. Her words, her presence, everything about her seemed to hint at something far bigger than the political game being played on the surface. Ethan knew there was more to her story than what she had told him. He couldn't stop thinking about her warning. The truth is the most dangerous weapon of all. He had asked for it, and now it seemed that the deeper he went, the more entangled he became in something he wasn't fully prepared to face. He had already made the choice to continue pursuing the truth, but as time passed, the weight of that decision grew heavier. Was he ready for what he might uncover? It was late, and the station was quieter than usual. Ethan had been up all night reviewing the reports, but nothing seemed to give him a clear picture of what was really happening. He decided to take a walk through the Vanguard, trying to clear his mind. He found himself wandering to the promenade, a place he often came when he needed to think. The view of space was calming, its vast emptiness offering him some small comfort. But tonight, the stars didn't seem so peaceful. As he walked along the corridor, lost in thought, he saw Lyra again. She stood by the observation window, her back to him, gazing out into the endless expanse of space. Her presence was always a quiet one, but it commanded attention. There was a grace to her that seemed out of place among the chaos of the station. Ethan paused for a moment, unsure of what to say. They had both been dancing around the truth, but something had changed in him. The urgency he felt to understand what was happening was growing, and it wasn't just about the peace talks anymore. It was about Lyra. It was about whatever she was hiding, and what role he had to play in all of it. Finally, he spoke. Lyra, he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet room. She turned, and once again their eyes met. There was something different in her gaze this time. Perhaps it was the weight of unspoken understanding, or perhaps the shift in Ethan's own heart that made her look at him in a new way. You've been avoiding me, Ethan said, trying to keep his tone light. But there was a seriousness behind his words that he couldn't hide. Lyra took a step toward him, her expression unreadable. I didn't think you were ready, she said, her voice calm, almost distant. The truth is not something you can unhear, Captain. Once you know, there's no going back. Ethan stood tall, meeting her gaze. I'm ready. I need to know. All of it. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the stars outside, as though considering how much to reveal. Finally, She sighed, the weight of the moment settling between them. You're right, she said softly. You deserve to know. But be warned, Captain. Once I tell you this, there's no turning back. The peace talks are just the surface. The real game is much darker. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, but he held firm. I'm not afraid. I need to know what's really going on here. Lyra nodded slowly, and for a moment Ethan could see something behind her eyes, something that spoke of years of secrets and struggles. I was sent here for more than just the peace talks. I was sent to protect something far more important. The Vash are not as united as you think. There are factions within our people, some who want peace and others who want war. And there are those who don't care about either, who want control. What's happening here isn't about diplomacy, it's about power, control of the galaxy. And you, Captain, are right in the middle of it. Ethan's heart raced. But why me? Why would they care about me? Because of the Vanguard, Lyra replied. Because of this station. It holds more than just political significance. It's a symbol, a rallying point for peace. But there are those who see it as a threat. If they control this station, they control the future of the galaxy. Ethan struggled to absorb everything she was telling him. So the peace talks aren't just a diplomatic effort, they're a cover for something bigger. Yes, Lyra said, her voice growing more serious. The talks are a distraction, but there are those who want to disrupt them, who will stop at nothing to ensure that peace is never achieved. They believe that the galaxy can only be controlled through war, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to start it. Ethan felt a wave of realization wash over him. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. The peace talks, the alliances, none of it mattered to the people who were pulling the strings. All that mattered was power, control. So what do we do now? Ethan asked, his voice a mix of determination and uncertainty. Lyra looked at him, her eyes dark with understanding. We expose them, she said simply. We stop them before they can destroy everything. Ethan nodded. It was clear now. There was no turning back. The path ahead would be dangerous, but it was the only path that mattered. They had to stop those who were trying to manipulate the peace talks for their own gain. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. But as Lyra turned to leave, Ethan couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, and the risks were high. But one thing was certain: he was in this now, and there was no turning back. The next few days felt like a blur to Ethan. The weight of everything he had learned began to sink in, and he couldn't stop thinking about the choices that lay ahead. Lyra had told him the truth, but it had only opened the door to more questions. Who were these people who wanted to destroy the peace talks? Why had they targeted Vanguard? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do now? The peace talks had officially collapsed. Tensions between the human and Vash delegations were at an all-time high. The negotiators were bitter, distrustful, and divided. Ethan could feel it in the air. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the next move. And he knew that the people pulling the strings behind the scenes weren't going to wait much longer. Time was running out. Ethan found himself in the command center late one night, reviewing reports with his team. He had never felt more alone. The responsibility on his shoulders was crushing. He wasn't just managing a diplomatic mission anymore. He was fighting to stop a war from breaking out, one that could destroy everything. "Captain, we need to talk." A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Lyra standing in the doorway, her usual calm demeanor in place. But there was something different in her eyes, something that told him she had more to say. Ethan nodded and stood up, motioning for her to come in. "What's going on?" Lyra stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the data screens before landing on him. "It's worse than we thought. The factions who want war have already made their move. We don't have much time." Ethan's heart sank. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "What are they planning?" "They've infiltrated the station's systems," Lyra said, her voice low. "They've been manipulating data, spreading misinformation, and sowing distrust among the crew. They've also planted explosives around key areas of the station, ready to detonate if the situation escalates. If they get their way, they'll destroy everything we've worked for, and they'll have the chaos they need to justify war. Ethan's mind raced. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. They were no longer just talking about sabotage, they were talking about a full-scale attack, and it was happening right under their noses. "We need to stop them," Ethan said, his voice filled with urgency. "Where do we start?" Lyra looked him in the eye, her expression hardening. "We need to find the leader of the faction, the person who's been pulling the strings. If we don't stop them, they'll bring the entire station down with their chaos." Ethan nodded. "Do you know who they are?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the floor before meeting his once more. "I have a suspicion, but we need hard evidence. The only way to get that is to break into their secure network. We'll need to move fast and stay ahead of them. If we're caught, it'll be the end of us." Ethan didn't flinch. He knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. He trusted Lyra. She had proven time and time again that she wasn't just a maid, she was a warrior and she had his back. "Then let's do it," he said. "We don't have much time." The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would infiltrate the security systems of the station, find the leader of the rogue faction and expose them before the situation could escalate any further. Ethan couldn't afford to hesitate. The future of the Vanguard, the peace talks, and the entire galaxy rested on their success. Lyra led him through the station's maze of hallways, her movements swift and precise. She seemed to know exactly where to go, and Ethan followed closely behind. They made their way to a section of the station that few people ever visited, a high-security area where the most sensitive operations were carried out. The door to the control room was locked, but Lyra effortlessly bypassed the security system, and they were inside within minutes. The room was quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of computers. Lyra went straight to the terminal, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. Ethan stood by, keeping watch, his heart pounding in his chest. Every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, Lyra looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. "I've found the information we need," she said, her voice steady. "The leader of the faction is a high-ranking Vash official, one of the diplomats in the delegation. They've been using their position to manipulate the talks from within." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had suspected that the traitors might be among the Vash, but to hear it confirmed was a shock. "We have to stop them before it's too late," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra nodded, already moving to send the data to the station's central command. But just as she was about to hit send, the door to the room suddenly slammed open. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as several armed figures rushed in, their weapons drawn. It was a trap. They had been caught. Lyra didn't hesitate. She moved with lightning speed, disarming the first attacker and knocking them to the ground. Ethan scrambled for cover, but the room was small, and there were too many of them. He had to think fast. Lyra turned to him, her expression determined. "Get to the control center," she said. "I'll hold them off. You have to expose the traitor. It's the only way." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but there was no time to argue. He nodded and ran for the door. He knew that this was it. This was the moment where everything would either fall into place or fall apart. As he sprinted down the corridor, Lyra's voice echoed in his ears. "There's no turning back now." Ethan reached the control center just as the first explosion rocked the station. The lights flickered and alarms blared through the halls. The countdown to war had begun. But Ethan wasn't going to let it end like this. He had one chance to stop everything, and he wasn't going to waste it. He rushed to the terminal and initiated the shutdown procedure, exposing the rogue faction's plans to the entire station. Within seconds, the traitor's identity was broadcast to every corner of the Vanguard. The entire station was thrown into chaos, but the truth was out. The war they had tried to start was no longer a possibility. Ethan watched as the screens flickered to life, his heart still racing. The battle wasn't over yet, but they had won the first round. and for the first time in a long while he felt a glimmer of hope.